I'm Lee Wheeler, founder of Exhibit A, and I just want to thank you all so much for coming here tonight and joining us during this busy, busy season. Thank you to SKC for hosting us to celebrate our new window exhibit, an art installation called Emotional Baggage by Piotr Krzymowski. Piotr was born in Poland, moved to London to study at the Central St. Martin College. His work has been exhibited across Europe and specifically in London, Whitechapel, ICA, Tate Modern, and Les Changeurs. In addition to installation, Piotr works in various mediums, including moving image, collage, sculpture, and painting. All of which we look forward to delving into with you more deeply tonight, thanks to Sylvia. And on that note, it is my great pleasure to introduce Sylvia Serafinowicz, a PhD from the Courtauld Institute, collections curator at the Vauxhall Contemporary Museum, a writer and regular contributor for Artform magazine, among many other publications. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
On a quick note of format, there'll be a discussion for 45 minutes, following 15 minutes of questions. So hopefully get you all to your dinners on time. Over to you all.
Thank you. First of all, it is such a pleasure to have you here, and thank you for coming on Thursday night. And it's an honor to discuss with Piotr his new installation and exhibition at Exhibit A. And I'm very privileged in the sense of following Piotr's work since 2012 and seeing how it develops. And we met for the first time at the ICA when he was exhibiting a number of new contemporaries, 2 videos. One was titled 73, the other one Voice. And in the scope of that exhibition, he gave an interview where he explained that he's very much interested in how technology impacts our seeing of the images and of the world. And I think in that sense, this work is a wonderful continuation of that interest, but at the same time, it uses a very different medium that is not so specific to your work. So I was curious, my first question is, how did you get to this place, and also what interested you in emojis?
Right. Well, first of all, welcome everyone, and thank you once again, Lee and Mark, for hosting this beautiful event and for having me at Exhibit A. Thank you, Sylvia, for agreeing to moderate the discussion. It's a pleasure to be talking to you again about what I do and our shared interests. But coming back to your question, in 2012 I was showing 2 video works, 73 and Boys, that were both revisiting certain current theories about cinema, especially the expanded cinema and how the current technology has influenced our way of seeing images, how being able to stop a movie at any time, we can see the image differently. And that's what these 2 works were about being able to see the same image more than once, being able to, as Roland Barthes called it, find the punctum in the image, find this very element that stops us and make us wonder about it. And these 2 videos were made using a found footage, and I think similarly here and similarly in the rest of my work, the starting point is always something that I come across, whether it's a sentence that I find in the book or a conversation that I overhear on the tube, or something that I find on YouTube on one of the nights when I cannot sleep and I just browse the internet. Or the emoji pillows, like in this case. So I find it difficult to sit in front of an empty page and start drawing, for instance. For me, the starting point is always this one element whether it's tangible or not, that already exists.
And in that sense, there are several elements in this work that might not be so visible on this photograph. So if you could tell us more about it, like how it was constructed and how it was put together.
So this specific installation is from a series of recent works in which I'm examining the very current digital information, whether it's an image or whether it's text, but it's something that exists virtually in this sort of extension, the online extension of our presence. And I'm particularly fascinated with what's online and what's digital, because once upon a time it was analog. So for me it's really important to remember about this tangible analog past of, for instance, things like emoji or other things that we'll discuss later. Emojis was just the next element that I found interesting to examine, since I use, if not overuse, them in my daily correspondence. And I'm sure you all know how the emoji pillows look like, because we all at some point walked down Oxford Street and stumbled across walls filled with these banal, identically looking pillows, which became quite of a phenomenon, just like the emoji icons themselves. I mean, on an average day, there's 60 million emojis used on Facebook and 5 billion emojis used in text messaging on iMessenger. So it really became the fastest growing language and alphabet. So it was this, just the next sort of sector of this digital culture that I found fascinating.
When I was preparing for this conversation, I came across a very interesting description of this product on eBay, and it says, emoji has transcended the realm of smartphone texts and email messages and arrived in the real world, soft, plush. They're emoji friends you can hold and rest your head upon. And I was wondering where this desire is coming from to make something that is virtual real again, because it is something that you were preoccupied as an artist again.
That's right. I just wanted to remind about the physicality and materiality and individuality of something that stands behind these icons or cushions, and I started packing them inside vacuum storage bags, deflating, and as a result you've got these sort of hanging sculptures that comprise of the emoji cushions and no air and the vacuum bags.
So why did you decide to use a bag like that, a vacuum bag? Because nothing is, everything you thought through, and so there's a reason for that.
Well, one reason was the fact that I can change the materiality of the cushions by putting them inside the storage bag and wrinkle them and squash them so they become this one abstract morph. But another one is that these bags, as the title suggests, are used for storing. We usually put our winter furs, jackets, whatever, and then suck the air out, and we're able to put as many as we can under bed to save space. But they're also used for shipment, for shipping things from point A to point B. And in that sense, it is reminiscent of sending a message from one person to another. So you could look at these plastic bags as envelopes that are different to normal envelopes, because usually the envelope hides the message. In here, the message is revealed. We can see all of the emojis very clearly. But then the emojis, in my opinion, are something that is also able to hide the real feeling, or is not as complex as the real feeling itself. So they can act as masks too.
When you spoke about that transparency, it just struck me that it says something very important about the nature of digital communication, because we never know where it's stored, for instance. And I heard a story of a man who requested from Tinder like the history of his messaging and usage, and he received like 63 pages transcript of like all the locations where he logged in. So from that example, we can see how transparent, in a way, and accessible, our messages are, like to other users and to administrators.
Well, they are and they aren't. It's always a mystery. We think that something that we send to a person is encrypt, is safe, and it's only visible to us and the recipient of the message. But then it's all stored somewhere in this invisible iCloud that I guess everyone, if they tried, could have access to.
And what do you think is happening with this work when it's exhibited in a vitrine?
Well, first of all, the icon that is used in a very intimate conversation becomes public. And they also become something that they are not. They become these morphs, these organisms that merge into one another. So I don't consider them as emojis anymore. They are composed of emojis, but they are not anymore.
And just one thing, when you're saying that their nature is changing and they become more wrinkled, do you think that makes them a little bit more human or more?
I would like to think so, because once you look closely at these sculptures, you really see every single wrinkle. You see the hair of the material that the emoji was made of. You see all the imperfections of the mass manufactured pillow. So that you definitely don't consider them as these perfect little icons on your phone.
And I noticed the titles of this work, which is not really a sentence, in a classical sense. This one, for instance, says, "The loving and cool wind screams at the love." Where those titles are coming from?
So let me just skip through images. We must go back to this point, but I just want to show you this screenshot. So I mentioned that emojis became quite of a phenomenon, and 39% of our daily conversations is through technology, either WhatsApp or iMessage or any other form of digital communication. And I mentioned the numbers of the usage of the emoji icons. And it became so popular that someone decided to create a dictionary that translates the emoji icons into text. And obviously it's an algorithm, so there is no real person standing behind it. Of course, someone must have written this program, but then the very moment of translation is pretty random, because every time you would type in the same order of emojis, you would have different results. But needless to say, this dictionary was created, so there is a growing demand in order to sort of bring these emojis back to text. And even at the very bottom, you have a sentence saying created by whoever for fellow linguists and emoji fans. So that shows that it really is the fastest growing language and something that we all use on a daily basis.
You used the word alphabet previously in a conversation with me. Why do you think this is an alternative to any other kind of alphabet that we have today?
Because it replaced, it simplified the communication, I think. We are not longer looking for words, we are not longer learning words. We've got this chart in the very front of our eyes, and we end up using it as some sort of means of communication, and that's That's what alphabet is.
You also, I remember that you referred to, you called an emoji a modern hieroglyph. What's that?
A modern hieroglyph.
Yes, sorry.
So hieroglyph originally were the alphabet, but they were symbols that were describing actions that were related to a specific letter. In here, we've got symbols that are related to specific emotion. So both, in case of the hieroglyphs and the emojis, there is a more complex action or an emotion behind. Now the question is whether these silly icons are able to put all of this message into one simple icon or not. I don't think they are. But you know, that's questionable.
Yes, that's my other question, because before we arrived at this stage, there was quite a lot of research done by different artists, and we have Charles Lebrun here, for instance. I think you have to go forward. Next one, this one. Those plates were done in 1806, and they were the first attempt at basically describing different facial expressions and trying to a first attempt to put them in some order and to understand and to create a universal understanding really of what different facial expressions stand for. So there was always this idea that it's universal, it's something that transcends cultures and languages, and that's why this kind of communication was called this extra linguistic communication, and it wasn't only popular in 19th century, and I know that one other person that you will tell us more about was more important to you than him, but this idea kind of stayed in people's minds, and also is still popular, as we can see. This is a very modern graph showing what content looks like and what joy looks like. So still this idea that we have a key to understand what people want to express.
But also we have a
present.
desire to classify things,
Yes.
to name things, to put them in a specific order, like the emojis. You know, they are supposed to be the atlas of emotions.
Yes.
Yet the emotions are much more complex than these, you know, smiley yellow faces that are looking at us every day from the screens of our phones. And that's all. That's also. I don't know if you mentioned already Paul Ekman, but that's
Yes,
one
that's
of your references.
Yes.
You know, he says that the feeling of joy, and there is a specific emoji icon expressing joy. It's very complex because you can feel joyful when you're relieved from pain, and you can also feel joyful when you're experiencing a tangible sexual experience, and these are two different, totally opposite
Kind of joy.
feelings and
Yes.
joys. And he also said that, you know, emotions are something that we don't necessarily do with our head. We cannot really make them. They just happen naturally, which is totally different to using emojis, because that is an extremely conscious act.
I saw a trailer for this film titled Emoji Film, and the whole plot is around this one emoji that doesn't want to express just one emotion because he knows that he has many more to offer, and the whole story is about that, but he doesn't want to fit in this box that he was put. So I think that is also something that you are trying to say. But I'd like you to go back to the figure from the past that you found particularly interesting. There's more about him.
So basically, if you trace the history of emoji, at some point you come across this extremely intriguing character called Duchamp de Boulogne, who in the mid-19th century was experimenting with human faces by treating them with electroshocks. And I know that it may seem to us like torture today, but this is actually what was totally acceptable in the mid 19th century. So Duchenne de Boulogne was originally a neurologist, and he was studying facial muscles. He was writing about human emotions, and he was sure that there is something more real hidden beneath the surface of the skin, of a person that is also censored by its own mind. Hence, he decided to use electroshocks. And you see here that these are some photographs from the experiments, but the result of these experiments is this atlas of emotions that he carefully composed together, that he named, that he coded. And when you look at the chart of emojis today, you can easily interpret Duchenne de Boulogne's research as the first emojis.
Mm.
The emojis as we know them now weren't in fact developed until the late 90s, when the Japanese designer, at that time he was a worker for a telecommunication company called Kurita, Shigetaki Kurita to be more specific, invented 176 emoji icons. And what is actually interesting is that the first icon that he designed and gave to the public was heart. And it was around for a couple of years. Then the mobile company decided to take the heart icon back. And this is when the sales in the market dropped significantly. Mm. And it just shows that Japanese culture specifically is really nuanced when it comes to visuals. And they also have this need, this is what he observed, that the Japanese culture, Japanese people have a very specific need to express feelings and tones in their correspondence. Hence, he decided these 176 icons, which look very basic to us today. But the icons as we know them now still have this, especially a couple of years ago, I'm sure we all remember that when we clicked on the food and drink category, we would have sushi and bento box and the sake bottle and some mysterious rice balls and obviously udon rather than pizza is pizza here, pasta is here, so that's semi-replacement, but I'm sure it gets updated to the point that in 2011 iPhone decided to introduce different skin tones, and now that raised a whole of an issue because people started questioning iPhone and asking, why should I define myself, my race, using an iPhone? Why is emoji not just a yellow symbol as it was originally? Why do we apply color to it? Why a white face seems like it's wearing masks when we click on it and try to define the color? It's questionable, that issue, but it shows that emoji became something extremely global and universal, as you were talking previously about emotions themselves.
Yes, but you actually introduced me to this idea of emoji, because what I imagine is that it started somewhere in the West. It's very ignorant, and that it colonized. Sorry, like my critical background is like resurfacing. That it colonized the world, and basically it's not true at all. It started in Japan, and it started from this very local, like you said, set of images, and then became something an export product, actually, that we all bought. So it's a very different story to what I imagine. And also, I read an interview with the inventor of emojis, and he's saying that the next step is to go back to the local. So we're making away the circle from this global idea of communication back to something that is more specific to us. And
more personal.
Yes.
Maybe at this point it's worth to mention the emoji sculptures from X to X. They are here in the room, but in case you cannot see them, I'll show you the pictures. They are actually on both of our sides, left and right. And it's the same emoji cushion that had its back replaced with a transparent PVC, and this horrible fluff from the inside has been replaced with handwritten 1920s love letters that were written by a British couple. And I know their names. They signed the letters with their names. However, it is an anonymous couple. It's very difficult to trace who they are, but the letters are full of emotions. And it's this contrast between something that became a very easy and already existing symbol that expresses love to something that once required time, most of all, skill of writing, skill of choosing the right words, patience to go to the post office and get the stamp, probably stand in the queue, and then post it, the anticipation of the receiver that was waiting for the message. And it's just the reminder that behind this emoji, I mentioned that already, there is the analog past.
And why would you do that as a frequent user of emoji?
Why would I do it?
Yes.
I think I'm addicted.
You're addicted addicted to emojis, but then you find certain kind of charm in letters as well. Like, it sounds very nostalgic to do it. And I wonder, where do you place yourself on the spectrum of like emoji users? Like, whether it's something that is out of necessity. Like, tell me more about your attitude.
It varies from a moment when I'm too occupied with something else, and emoji is the easiest way of sort of continuing the conversation or ending the conversation, to not being able to find the right word, or just feeling extremely affectionate to these little icons that I've lived with for a while, and using them as a part of the alphabet that I guess we are absorbing more and more.
And I'm very curious, how did you find, like, where did you find those letters? And
on a flea market, I just came across. I had this idea of filling them up with love letters, and one day, one walk on Portobello Road, here they were.
And they were in a box? Like,
they were in a Clarins box, so they looked very inconspicuous. They looked like an expired set of Clarins cosmetics, but then once I opened it, it actually was handwritten love letters.
But it means that they brought them together, right? That
they were. However, it's just from one side. It's only the letters that that the lady received.
I see.
Okay.
And I thought that maybe
probably the
there
man
was
still has them.
I thought that maybe there was I was hoping for a happy ending. That everyone together and there was both.
Oh, it's yet to come.
Yes, you have to revisit the market. Maybe there's another box. I was also curious whether you were interested in personalization of emojis, because I recently came across like certain articles like talking about how people are like inventing their own codes and applying meanings to to emojis, like a fox, for instance, that is like sneaking out the house. Did you look into that? Or is it something?
Well, I guess we all have our own emoji fetishes, and we all sort of put a different meaning to them. Like for me, and I'm not going to describe it, a mouse has a very specific, very specific. Well, later when I have this microphone clipped out. But I guess we all apply our own meanings depending on our emotional baggage, depending on what we learned from the past, depending on what we feel about certain icons that represent a mouse, for example.
Yes. Sometimes it's easier to use icons, like symbolic signs, instead of using the words.
But simpler doesn't mean better. I mean, where is that going? What is the next step? Are we going to use words?
Better. I think it's also a sign of the time that
It's lazy.
Yes, we don't have time to write now. That's why.
Everyone has time. it's lazy.
No.
But
Yeah.
even, I like to use emojis for negative. When I'm angry, I rather send this
Really,
red
you
face
don't
that
have
saying
to-
piss me off, yeah?
The opposite actually.
Yeah, you write them one message.
No, I'm using this positive emojis. when I
Well, I'm
do
surprised I didn't
express.
receive any red faces from you yet.
Just for one person. Who
Or
can
you
take
do.
them?
Your husband.
Because of this technology and today, we're really online all the time. We don't have time really to write these long messages. That's why I said it's a sign of the time.
Mhm.
Emojis, it's like it helps us, to manage all messages.
And multiple messages at the
Yes,
same time, right?
yes. Actually, we know with Piotr because we exchange text messages every day. Yes, and we're using both of us.
Yeah.
It's easier.
Sometimes it is. Absolutely.
Before we jump to this one, I also wanted to ask about the photographs titled.
Right, the
Suck It Up.
photographs, they are titled Suck It Up, which is which refers both to the process of working with these emoji cushions and vacuum bags when the air is being sucked out. But also it's a term which has a negative connotation, but when I tell you suck it up, it means calm down, don't show your emotions, hide them. So it does refer to the emotions themselves. But these photographs are the close-ups of the sculptures, and they show really well the very detail of the components. So they show the detail of the hair of the pillow, the wrinkles, all the imperfections from the manufacturer.
But it's interesting to me that because photography is something that is very characteristic for your practice, but you bring it back to this two-dimensional world. You bring back those skills to that virtual world in a way, because I only imagine, maybe I'm wrong, that you're using a digital camera
Yes.
as well. You got some from
You're hoping
digital-
for the analog Zenit.
No, I don't have a preference, but I mean I do, but but it's interesting that from digital you go to the physical and back to digital. And how do you feel about that?
Well, I guess they are all parallel in a sense. We still, there's still action behind dealing with digital camera. You still need to use the computer. You very often print the digital image on a paper. So I don't really think that analog was in 100% replaced by the digital technology. It's there. Digital is the new addition to the analog, and it helped in many ways, but still the action requires a lot of analog tasks.
I'm fascinated by this activity that you're doing because there's a lot of writing about how virtual reality is not really relevant to the actual reality in terms of money, for instance. The value of virtual money is not the same as the value of real physical money. So the fact that you try to keep those two so close to each other and see how one translates to another is quite it is fascinating and unique. And that actually takes us to that work
That takes us
love.
to the hourglass that has
Yes.
very little sand left in the top part, and I wonder how much time we actually have
Yes,
with the
we're
conversation.
fine. We're fine.
But that is another example of the recent works in which I'm examining this digital current information and translating it into something physical. So something that is in front of our eyes, like a digital image, I'm trying to translate into something that is in front of our bodies. And what you look at here is actually an Instagram story that I managed to translate into sand. That is the very image of the Instagram story. I'm sure it looks familiar to some of you, and I'm fascinated by the Instagram story for many reasons. Mainly because it's got such a short lifespan and it only lasts 24 hours. And it's sad because I think our relationship to an image changes and we have less respect for an image. I remember the times when my dad gave me the analog Zenit camera. He said, "Son, here is the film. You put the film in, there's only 36 shots." And I had to count in my head how many shots I have left, and I had to choose really carefully what I photograph. And this is not to say that that has not been carefully photographed. However, we can take as many pictures as we want,
Yes.
and we can re-edit them, we can share them instantly, and after 24 hours, they're gone. And also what is fascinating is that every time you go and see this image on Instagram story, it shows you the time from the moment it was born. So it also acts as a clock. Hence this desire to turn an Instagram story into an hourglass. And now you probably wonder, how the hell did he turn an Instagram story into sand? So here's the answer. I managed to analyze the picture, the digital picture, in a couple of softwares, which first of all gave me the amount of pixels in the Instagram story. Now, then I made a research on how many pixels there is in 1 kilogram of sand. And I tried to put as many, I tried to basically have as many sand grains as there is pixels. So 1 sand grain inside the hourglass corresponds to 1 pixel from the digital image. Then another software ran for the colors, and it gave me the generic blues and greens and yellows, etc. It gave me the percentage result, which I then applied on the weight of the sand that they need. And that is, it probably looks like a dealer's, drug dealer's desk, but it actually is one of the stages of the process of measuring how much sand I need in order to have exactly the same amount of pixels. And that is the result. The hourglass that is tangible, that measures time, just like Instagram story, but rather than measuring 24 hours, which is the original lifespan of Instagram story, it measures the weight, if you like, of the Instagram story, because it lets the pixels flow.
I really love that work, and I think on this note we should open to the questions from the audience, because we're very curious about
How many pillows did you use?
You won't find any more on Amazon. At least for a while.
Why did you choose that Instagram story?
Because it was meant to be a birthday gift, and it was. But also because I spent a lot of time this summer looking at this panorama of the south of France, and I wanted to turn it into a tangible souvenir.
So you can turn my story into
Of course,
an hourglass.
anything,
Thank
anything you like.
For the right price, anything is
Yes.
This is about this. You had this color chart at some stage, and I was just
Here?
curious whether I saw correctly what yellow meant.
Oh, here.
No,
Oh,
the kind of was the circle yellow chart previously in your research. Oh, that one. Was it scared?
that is Paul Ekman's 6 basic emotions.
Yeah, and the fact that I was always wondering why emoji is yellow.
Seriously, I absolutely don't understand what people said.
Oh my God, I love this interpretation, and I know that out of anyone in this room, you're probably the latest person to use emoji symbols in any conversation that I am yet to receive from you.
That's true, because I don't understand it. And they
I'm
say-
still learning about them. I don't know why Paul Ekman decided. But emojis originally were yellow, almost like cartoon characters. I guess they were supposed to be quite generic in a sense of not having a specific skin tone and look like something that is not human, but yet it's supposed to express human emotions. So they were quite contradictory from the beginning, I think.
So
Yes.
have you attempted to humanize them by removing the air and creating these wrinkles and aging them and, in a sense, displaying them as a mask for something which might actually mean something different? Is that something that interests you?
Absolutely. I mean, as I said at the beginning, joy has a lot of interpretations, and joy is a lot of experiences. And why is one specific emoji that is coded as joy supposed to express and represent all these different emotions of joy? So in many ways, I think they are fake, and they hide a lot of true emotions underneath. Hence the desire to destroy them and to show their materiality, to show that there is something authentic lying behind. And also this accidental process of sucking the air out. Of course, I'm not in control of every single wrinkle. That is similar to the process of expressing an emotion. Very often we are unaware of what is being written in our faces.
There was a question.
Yeah, I'm very interested in the idea of emojis as a language. I don't remember the exact stats, but you said it makes up 30% or something of their communications
So,
today.
39% of our communication daily is on digital technology.
Okay. So I think the idea of emojis as a language is quite pertinent today. I also, from my understanding, maybe I'm wrong in this, but emojis are now run by a conglomerate. So if you want to add emojis or delete emojis, you have to get permission. When you look at language in general, the English language, the Polish language, the French language, I think part of the development of language comes from the fact that it's open to everyone, that there are words that are created every day. There's slang, there's bay, or whatever, BFF, words that are kind of can develop. Emojis, I don't think, are like that. You can't just create a new emoji and put it on your phone. Because of that, I think there's a question to how we see the process of emojis evolve. Do we think that the language of emoji has a future if it can't develop naturally? Now, if it doesn't, then your art today, do you want it to represent kind of a period in time? So almost like saying, look, your art here is representing 2017 when emojis meant something huge. In 10 years, maybe emojis won't mean anything at all. I think that's one way to look at it, but you can look at it kind of on the opposite way of saying, no, emojis are the language of the future, and they're here to, this is the new communications, and I want to show the new communication. I guess my question to you is, A, do you see development for the language of emojis into the future? And what's your idea with your art? Is your art going to develop along with the emojis, or is it kind of set in this time period to represent the time and place? It's a bit of a complicated question, but...
Well, I'm curious myself to see how it evolves, but just looking at, weirdly, both my cousin, who is 11, actually younger, 9, 8 and a half, 9, and my mother, who is 55, I'm not sure who uses the emojis more. Honestly, sometimes I receive this cascade of icons from my mother, and well, I didn't teach her, and this is, that is fascinating, that we learn about emojis at different times of our life, different generations learn about them differently, and of course it's a very controlled language because someone sits there in the office and designs it for you, unlike the language that you learn from your parents, that you are able then to twist, to change yourself, and then you're totally responsible for it. But then, we all do put different meanings to different icons. We all do combine them differently. So, of course, it's a language that has been composed by someone else, but then I think that we adapt it to our own needs, and we also evolve it.
Don't you think that, that the fact that there are GIFs right now kind of suggests that there wasn't enough, of the signs to express what you wanted to express, because this part is also very popular. I always end up with 770 saved on my phone, and I don't know how, just like people sending you.
Well, I guess we all have a desire to communicate with more visuals.
And movement might be something that people are missing.
Definitely.
I think your point was very interesting, but I think that language is also controlled. There's the Oxford dictionary, there's the Académie Française. So there are controls on language and words just like there are on emojis. So my question would be, are emojis an alphabet, or is it an art, or is it emotion? How do you look at emojis? If you had to define emojis to you as a tool.
To me, they are something that I find extremely fascinating to examine, but they are something that I can live without. So I actually feel happier to use words, and if I didn't have emojis, I would be a very happy person, because I would be forced to use words that I learned once. But my cousin, for instance, who is 9, and if you took the emojis away from him, I think he would be quite lost in conversation, because I very often overlooked the screen of his phone whilst he was talking to his classmates, I suppose, and it's all just a stream of emojis. So it just looks like it's the secret code that they are using, and they don't want anyone else to know what they're talking about. To me, it's fascinating to look at it now, and obviously to see how it evolves in the future.
Our Campbell soup can.
Yes.
Another question from this corner. Do we have? Yes.
I actually spent most of the day today at the Royal Academy. I'm not talking about the emojis, but one of the slides when you had the moustache, and there was so much history of art. I saw the yellow. Your image.
My image.
No. Yours.
Was it one of these sculptures here?
No.
It was the
Sorry,
kissing face.
I think I'm lost in translation, but there was.
Oh, maybe
I
you
think it was the
mean
lips of the kissing
this
face.
one?
No, keep going.
Keep going. Yes.
Yes.
And I see Daniel Duchamp,
Mm.
and I see Jasper Jones, and there was reference to it, and I just look at it. That seems such a simple image, but there is, I can see history of art there, and I just connect it, and I go, wow, images I'm not going to connect, but this is fantastic.
You may have to stop on that note.
Yes, I think so. Yes, it's a really good. Yes.
Well, we are running out of sand, which means that we are running out of time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for joining us.